The Economist.
Hello and welcome to The Intelligence from The Economist. I'm your host, Rosie Blore. Every weekday we provide a fresh perspective on the events shaping your world. While many European capitals bemoan the onslaught of tourists, Asian countries are happily welcoming more and more of them, both from within the region and further afield. And we're all going to have to get to grips with artificial intelligence, not least because, for many of us, our kids are already using or encountering it. This week we answer another listener question. How should parents talk to their children about AI? But first, renewable energy is a wonderful thing, and we're using more and more of it. There's just one problem. Whereas coal and gas sit there storing their energy until the moment you switch on the generator, the sun only shines in the daytime, and the wind doesn't always blow. Which means there are gaps in the coverage. There's a temptation to turn back to reliable old fossil fuels. But instead, we can now keep the lights on using batteries, giant ones.
Energy storage has always been a promising idea, a tantalizing way to solve the problem of wind and solar intermittency, but it's never really scaled up until now.
Vijay Vaitaswaran is our Global Energy and Climate Innovation Editor.
We're now seeing fascinating, innovative examples like carbon-negative skyscrapers that incorporate gravity-based energy storage being developed in the Middle East. Italy is going to build a massive facility using compressed carbon dioxide stored inside what looks like a big white tennis dome by a company called Energy Dome. There's a company backed by Bill Gates in America, Form Energy, that's building very inexpensive batteries using iron rather than lithium. That's going to be the world's longest duration battery, capable of 100 hours of storage. So these are all new kinds of innovations that are coming to the problem of energy storage without needing to use expensive and complicated lithium that we're all familiar with from our iPhones and Teslas.
So as you say, we've been talking about battery storage and the need and desire to scale it up for a long time. So how is it happening now? What's changed?
A couple of things have come together, a happy and virtuous kind of confluence. First, renewable energy's taken off quite dramatically. Of course, our listeners will be aware solar energy's had extraordinary success and costs have plunged. The rates of penetration have gone up in some key markets like parts of Europe, Australia, parts of the US. 30-40% of the grid regularly get power from intermittent renewables like solar, particularly, but also wind. And this is headed in one direction only. It's going to be over half, maybe even 60% of the global power mix as countries get serious about decarbonizing their power grid. So that's the first trend, because solar is advancing so quickly for its own reasons. It's so cheap that it's demanding something to complement it, because the sun only shines when it shines, the wind only blows when it blows. And so you need something to complement it so that those intermittencies can be overcome and become clean, firm power.
So that's increasing renewable supply. What's the other part of this happy and virtuous confluence you mentioned that's enabling us to scale up on battery storage?
The other interesting trend at the same time is that electric vehicles have taken off, thanks mainly to China, but now it's a global phenomenon. And the batteries that are used there, the lithium-ion batteries that, again, we'll be familiar with from our smartphones, more or less the same kind of technology in cars. There's a massive global glut because of overbuilding. And so the prices for those batteries have plunged dramatically. So that same technology and the same input in the supply chain is benefiting grid-scale batteries, which have now become much more affordable. So there's two related tangential factors that are coming together in a virtuous cycle.
So you're saying an overcapacity of batteries, which we would normally think of as a bad thing, is actually going to end up benefiting this industry?
This is the irony. This is a terrible time to be a battery company. Again, a lot of them are in China, but some of them are in the West as well. And because prices have collapsed, because there's so much overcapacity in building, particularly in China, it's very hard to compete. Most of them are on very thin margins, or many projects are getting canceled. More than 19 big factories of a gigawatt scale have been canceled this year. But actually, what this means is that because the prices are lower, there's so much excess volume, they're finding a new application. They're not just being taken in to make BYD cars or Tesla cars. Companies are repurposing them for the grid, which had been a previously overlooked market, and they're finding a very attractive market to make grid-scale batteries. So it's good news for society, it's good news for the grid, and for the solar companies that need batteries to complement their intermittent source of power. It's good news to keep the lights on. Not so good news for many of those battery companies as that industry consolidates.
How does this compare to what happened in the solar industry, where we also saw overcapacity at one point, companies going bust, and then prices going down? Is it the same sort of trend?
It's very interesting. You know, the old saying, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And in a sense, that's what's happening here. There is a similar phenomena whereby, as with solar, where there were vast overcapacity and that led to lower prices and adoption by the world. It was very good for the world that China built all that excess capacity. We're seeing a similar phenomena in lithium-ion batteries, particularly the big batteries that mostly are being used in the short term until newer technologies come along. But there's a difference. The supply chains are a little more complicated, so it's not a perfect analogy with solar. And the second difference is that it's happening much, much faster. One analyst I spoke with, who was a leading solar analyst for many years, now covering batteries, told me that what happened in 15 years in solar is happening now in 5 years with batteries.
And just clarify for me, has there actually been a step change in the battery technology as well as them becoming much cheaper?
So battery technology is advanced in several ways. The most important, it must be said, is with price. That was a big barrier for grid-scale batteries. It used to be that big batteries for the grid, even the ones using very similar technology as those for EVs, were just much more expensive. There wasn't a lot of investment or innovation applied to them. Companies didn't focus on them. There were fewer competitors, so prices were much higher. The price drop is the biggest change. However, innovation is very strong in this industry. A couple of the Chinese companies, BYD, one of the world's biggest EV companies, also battery companies, has such investments in automation and AI that some of their factories are practically human-free. They're almost fully automated. Another Goliath, CATL, a Chinese Goliath, has invested billions and billions of dollars in innovation in manufacturing batteries in the supply chain, $2.5 billion per year in R&D and development on the most recent analysis. So it defies that picture of just sort of state-subsidized, lazy champions. These are world-class companies, and that actually is producing better batteries with greater energy density, for example, and bespoke, made for grid storage, because the requirements are a little different. It's not exactly cut and paste from putting them in an EV. And so you're actually seeing the emergence of a proper industry. And proof point, in China, where grid batteries were virtually nil 5-6 years ago, in the most recent year, about a third of the size of the market for EV batteries, and we know China is the biggest EV market in the world, and for the first time outpacing the number of batteries, volume of energy density used for consumer electronics in China. So this has really come into its own.
Vijay, I keep waiting for a but here and waiting for the kind of but the problem is, but this seems like it actually is a good news story.
This is a very good news story. This has always made sense. You know, energy storage is one of the solutions to the success of renewables taking off. You need to have something to help keep the grid stable, to shift the peak when prices spike. In California, for example, everyone enjoys sun during the day, and then they come home and they turn on the air conditioning when there's no sun. It creates a massive spike in prices. Because of policies that they've introduced, they have grid-scale batteries that are able to shift that power by a few hours so that they don't have brownouts or blackouts or the prices don't spike out of control. So if there's a big but, as it were, that is, only some markets have policies that can encourage energy storage, especially the long duration storage that might help a market get through a multi-day blackout, for example, if it happens. In Germany, the Dunkelflaute, where the wind and the sun are missing for some period of time, even weeks. You can't just have a little teeny battery. You probably need a more serious energy storage system, and you probably need some policies that support that. And so that's the thing that's missing in many markets. We haven't updated our market framework and our rules of the road to acknowledge the way that the technologies are shifting on the grid, like intermittent solar.
Vijay, thank you so much. Great to talk to you.
It's my pleasure.
I recently traveled from Delhi to Udaipur, which is in the western part of India. and I was there for a few days with family.
Anjani Trivedi is The Economist's global business writer.
I was struck by the number of well-heeled tourists that were there from Miami to Mumbai to Boston to Madras, or Chennai, as they call it now. And people were not put off by how hot it was or how humid it was. And this is not a typical high tourist season. The monsoon season is starting, but that didn't seem to faze tourists. All the hotels across Udaipur were completely packed. You call up, try to book a table for a restaurant, fully booked. And similarly, when you walk through other airports in Mumbai and elsewhere, there's a lot of tourists, domestic and international, coming through. And it's not just India. It's across Asia, from Indonesia to Japan to Thailand. Tourists are flooding into all places.
So what's going on, Anjani? Put some numbers on this tourism boom and explain where people are going.
So if we look at the global picture, people have gone beyond just the revenge spending and the revenge holiday making that happened after the post-COVID low. And travelers' outbound spending this year is expected to exceed that of 2019, so just before COVID, and hit just over 1.8 trillion. A few factors are at play. One is, of course, people now want more experiences and are generally avoiding buying goods. So the whole experiential travel has become much more of an important factor for people when they book holidays. The other thing is the US dollar, which has been very strong. And so a lot of Americans are traveling further. And through COVID, people just realized they wanted more mental space. And the numbers show it. People are taking more vacation in countries where people left a lot of holidays on the table, like America, Australia, and Japan. People are now using up more of their days off. So they now have more time to go further. And a lot of the popular destinations are starting to push back on the over-tourism. And so we've seen Venice and Barcelona. There's been protests there. But Asia has been very welcoming.
And where are people going in Asia?
You know, more and more people are now going to further destinations. It's not just let's go to Tokyo to shop and eat sushi. It's let's go further out. Let's go to the temples. Let's go see the 88 temples and do the pilgrimage. Let's go and see the Komodo dragons in Indonesia, which people were doing before, but more people are doing them now. More people want to go and do Mount Everest, the base camp, and take private tours there. More people are booking more extravagant holidays. And those opportunities have encouraged hotel operators and airline companies, which are typically pretty careful when they're putting down a bet on where they're going to build more rooms or where they're going to have more routes to. It's a very demand-driven, careful calculation because it's also forecasting effectively. There's been the demand, but there's also been the supply, and that has matched up. And I think that has encouraged yet more travelers.
And who are these tourists? Where are they coming from?
If we look at the numbers, the first group is Americans who have a strong dollar in their wallets, and they can now take that dollar further because against currencies in Asia, it's very strong. As someone told me, why would I go have a $15 Starbucks in Hawaii when I can go and have unlimited sake and sashimi and all sorts of things in Japan? So that's one big group. The second is Asian tourists themselves, the tourists from within the region. One is Indians. Now, the Indians have a booming economy. There has been a big uptick of the middle class, and that's continuing to grow. So this newfound wealth is encouraging people to go out and seek out new experiences. And the second group within the Asian region is the return of the Chinese tourists. Now, the Chinese were the biggest spenders on outbound tourism before COVID. Of course, during COVID, because of the restrictions and because a lot of airlines shut down routes to China and from China, there was a huge fall off. But these tourists are now returning and they are staying closer to home. They want to go explore more into Southeast Asia, in India, in the Middle East.
You've already mentioned over-tourism in Europe, and it sounds like Asia is going to be picking up a lot of the slack. How well are tourist spots in Asia equipped to cope with that rise in tourism, particularly if it's such a rapid rise, as you say?
I guess we should start with that entry point, which is the airport. So we've started to see airports in parts of Central Asia, parts of East Asia, expanding terminals. They are upgrading the infrastructure. There's a big effort to digitalize, entry points, immigration, and so on to speed it up. But also hotel operators. If you look at the number of hotel rooms that are being built in Asia, I believe it's over 500,000. That's up 4%. So there's a lot more accommodation for people. And the local airlines are now boosting regional flights. And so those options have encouraged more people. And with more of these facilities, the costs are not exorbitant.
Anjani, you mentioned a tilt to the Middle East as well.
With more Indians and more Chinese traveling and staying closer to home, the Middle East is a natural destination. Not only because the UAE and Saudi Arabia are building out a massive tourism industry with hotels and flights and entertainment and so on, but also because the visas for Indian travelers and Chinese travelers are a lot easier coming into these places. So that has been a big advantage. And if we look at flights to the Middle East from China, they're already more than they were before COVID. So that's been a huge draw for Asian travelers. It's very close to home. The joke goes in India that Dubai is just another functional Indian city. It's closer for me to go from Dubai to Mumbai than it is for my parents to go from Delhi to Mumbai. I think the Middle East is benefiting from that Indian tourism because it's a place for an easy, short, nice holiday. I think all of this really means that holiday seekers, whether they're from America or Europe or India or China, will have many more reasons to look east.
Anjani, thank you so much. It's great to talk to you as always.
Thank you, Rosie. Thank you for having me.
In just a few years, artificial intelligence has gone from something that a few techies were using to a phenomenon that people are talking about with regard to almost every aspect of our lives.
OpenAI helped kickstart the new era of artificial intelligence with its text-generating tool ChatGPT. It stunned us.
The AI that can write your essays, your movie scripts, and even a Nick Cave song.
It took Netflix more than 3 years to reach 1 million users, but it took ChatGPT just 5 days. Techies everywhere.
It's got to the point where I feel like if I don't start getting to grips with what AI can do, it might start trying to do what I actually do.
Now it's unveiling Voice Engine, a new text-to-audio generator. OpenAI is saying it needs only a 15-second sample to generate a synthetic voice.
To help us all learn more about this incredible and occasionally terrifying technology, this summer The Economist has been running Schools Briefs, simple guides to this complex new world. We've also been inviting you, our listeners, to write in with your questions about AI. And this week we have Mary Jackemeyer from Dallas, Texas.
How can parents, both in theory and practice, educate and thoughtfully guide children about the possibilities and cautions of AI in our lives?
We put this to our colleague Ludwig Siegler, who now devotes much of his time to helping The Economist work out how it can use AI.
This is a very, very important question, but also a very hard one. As with all technologies, there are opportunities and there are risks. And the opportunities are pretty obvious. It's great to have a tool that you can ask and it talks back to you in an almost human way. You can experiment with it. You can create stuff. These things not only generate text, but images. I think it's fun for kids. The kids I've seen playing with the services that generate images, it's great. And they have much better ideas what to create. I think it helps kids discover the world, ask things, ask dumb questions. But at the same time, there are risks. And the risks is that kids spend even more time online. It's addictive. Chatbots are, in a way, not your friend in the sense that they try to please you, but they're not always correct. And then there's, of course, stuff that is particularly worrying for kids and parents, like deepfakes or deepfake pornography, pasting a face of somebody on a naked body and all that. And that's happening. There's cases in schools are multiplying where kids are sending around deepfake pornography. Real dangers parents have to worry about. And so when my kids grew up, social media became a thing. And that was already difficult. But I think dealing with AI is much more difficult to grapple with as parents or as journalists for that matter. Social media, for instance, has many issues, but in a way you can feel your way into what to do about it and how to talk about it. AI it's language, and language penetrates everything. And so I think it's much more complicated for parents to deal with it. And I mean, this is only the first iteration of the technology. The technology is getting better, and it's getting better rapidly. So right now it's images. Soon you'll be able to do fake videos, deep fake videos of people. The complexity of the technology, the quality of the technology will get better, and so will the risks and what parents should do about it. It's important that parents find a way to deal with it and find a way to talk to their kids about the technology and find the balance. When my kids were young, we regularly sat down to have what we call tech talks, to talk about technology together, to experiment with technology, to see what they had learned, what I can teach them. With AI, that's also really important. When talking to my kids during these tech talks, I quickly realized that I could learn much more from them than they probably could learn from me. I mean, they had a much more intuitive way of dealing or using the technology. And that also helped me as a tech journalist to see what's actually important for them rather than what I thought was important. We talked about how the technology actually works. And I think that's really important with generative AI, with ChatGPT, to try to explain that these are models trained on lots of data, lots of text from the internet, and that they're not like this brain in the sky that knows everything. That's the first step. From there, it becomes also easier to talk about these things can make things up. They don't know everything. It's baked into the technology that they have to hallucinate or confabulate, which is the better term for that, making things up, because otherwise it wouldn't work, and so on. So I think it's important to talk about the technology, how it works, what the limitations are. And of course, the main goal here is that the kids learn how to critically engage with the technology, that yes, they should use it, but they should know what the limitations are. This brings me to my last point. So I think kids should absolutely use this stuff, but there should be some ground rules. Don't always believe what the thing says. It can make things up. If you use it for homework, check it, do a Google search, talk to other people, read a book, find out whether it's actually true. Another thing is don't ever put personal information into these machines, because that information may be used to train the algorithm and may pop up elsewhere where it shouldn't pop up. So be careful about that. Parents should tell kids, don't do deep fakes, don't send them around. It will get you in trouble. And of course, the most important thing is that these technologies, and that applies to all digital technologies, they should not be used as a replacement for human interactions. Again, this is the early days in the technology. This is the first iteration. These tools will get better. They won't go away. And so since they won't go away, it's really important that kids know how to use them. And not just to protect them, but also knowing how to use them and knowing how to use them properly is a form of digital literacy, which they will need in their future lives.
And a reminder that if you're a student, you now have free access to Espresso, our daily news app. You can find out more on economist.com. And if you want to hear more about AI, do check out Babbage, our science podcast, which this week asks, what is artificial general intelligence? That's it for this episode of The Intelligence. Do send us any comments. You can get in touch at podcast@economist.com. We'll see you back here tomorrow.